Okay, so briefly, what we were saying previously was um, after the destruction of the Second Temple, and especially after the destruction of Beitar, where the main Bar Kokhba Revolt, that was the headquarters, that's where it was managed from. That was their stronghold. Once that was destroyed and there was a huge massacre, the Roman Empire started targeting the Hachamim themselves. Um, and that really brought tremendous disaster, but not just physical disaster to the Jewish people, but also it didn't allow an environment to really study and further develop the Torah, which was happening, which took place up until now. Uh, Now we reach the era of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who he was heir to both uh, two lineages, one starting from Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, right, who was he was the president of the court in the times of the destruction, and he had his lineage that went down, right, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. His student was Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, right? Rabbi Eliezer the Great. His student was Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Akiva's student was Rabbi Meir, and among others. And his student was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, right? That's one lineage. We'll call it the teacher-student lineage. And there was another lineage that he was actually a biological heir to, and that was the lineage of Rabban Gamliel, which started with Hillel Hazaken, right? Hillel and his son was Rabban Shimon, and his son was Rabban Gamliel, and his son was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and they were also either presidents of the court or the deputy president of the court, right? They were either the Nasi or the Av Bedin, all the way down to Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So he really inherited these two different traditions. I mean, the traditions themselves aren't different, but anything that developed, anything new that developed over the years, and that there may have been a dispute between the Hachamim, we now have someone who received those disputes in his inheritance from these two lineages. And he is now the perfect person to organize everything. Never mind that he is also extremely wealthy, extremely well respected by the authorities, and he is on very, very good terms with the Roman emperor. And he loves him, and they have a great relationship, great discussions, to the point where they say that he may have even converted him secretly. Okay? So now, this time from the destruction of Beitar, right? This happened, the Bar Kokhba Revolt. This happened in the times of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva started also this new project of starting to write up all the traditions that we have. Any new case or all the traditions. Remember, we said earlier back that the Supreme Court, when they have a new case comes to them, they have these 13 tools that they can use in order to extract or extrapolate the law from the written text. These 13 rules are called the 13 midot, שהתורה נדרשת בהן. These are the 13 rules that you can use in order to make a dirasha on the written law, the Torah shebichtav. What Rabbi Akiva did was he said, you know what? People, they're going to start forgetting the laws. He's afraid because of the persecution, people aren't going to remember not just the new laws, but even the traditions that we received from Moshe. So he said, let's take every single law that we have a tradition on, even though it was passed down orally, and we never needed the written text in order to know the law. Let's link it to the written text using these 13 midot. Meaning, even if we know, for instance, that a sukkah needs to be a certain height, or it can't be more than a certain height, let's find a way to connect that to the written text using this 13 midot. And him and his students started to write books, each one with their own dirashot, each one with their own teachings, connecting the traditions that we receive to the written text. Okay? So, ve'elu baraitot, and these are the baraitot. We said the baraita is a word in Aramaic. It literally means external. External to what? It's external to the Mishnah, meaning not everything that's quoted in these books or written in these books is quoted in the Mishnah. And we'll see why and how the Mishnah was formed soon. So these baraitot and the Tosefta, these extra midrashim, vesifra vesifri, right? These are the names of some of these compilations of these derashot. These are the things that the earlier Hachamim studied. Right? And then came these three Hachamim, collected all sorts of these dirashot, and put them together in a book. Right? Each one has his own collection of these teachings. Right? The one that was collected by Rabbi Nehemiah is called Tosefta. One that was collected by Rabbi Yehuda is called the Sifra. And one collected by Rabbi Shimon is Sifre. And it could be confusing later because we'll see that what we call Sifra and Sifri today isn't necessarily the same Sifra and Sifri. Right? And then there's...
Question.
Sorry?
I have a question, I'm sorry. The Baraita and the Tosfeta, it's after the Mishnah, right?
All right, that's a very good question. So the Baraitot all existed before the Mishnah.
Okay.
The Baraitot are those things that the Mishnah does not quote in it. The Mishnah itself is all quoting these books, mostly the compilation of Rabbi Meir. And that's what's called Matnitin. Right? Now,
Okay.
there is another Tosefta. It's not a Tosefta of Rabbi Nehemiah. It's a Tosefta of the student of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and that is the more famous Tosefta, written by his student Rabbi Hiya, and that comes after the Mishnah. That's kind of like an amendment to the Mishnah.
Okay.
But that's not this Tosefta that was written by Rabbi Nehemiah.
Okay.
But Sam, what is the one that was a collection from the grandson of Rashi? Isn't it Tosefta? Tosafot? It
Oh,
starts with...
that's Tosafot. That's
Oh, it's
Tosafot.
different?
Oh, okay,
And
well,
most people pronounce it also Tosfot or Toisfot, depends if you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi. Those are the Tosafot. That's something else, right?
Oh.
This, we're talking still a long time, maybe 900 years before Rashi. The Tosafot is on the Talmud itself.
what
Now we're
does
talking
that mean?
about...
Tosfeta?
Well, it all comes to the word Tosefet, means an addition.
Okay, in addition, okay.
Or like complementary. So this Tosefta,
An
you see what
addition
it repeats itself a lot. Tosefta, Tosefta, Tosafot, because they're all complementary to something else.
Okay.
Okay, so here we're talking about a Tosefta that's prior to the Mishnah, as opposed to the Tosefta, the more famous Tosefta of Rabbi Hiya, which is complementary to the Mishnah itself, as opposed to the Tosafot, which is from the grandchildren or of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, right? Which is complementary to the Talmud itself, which comes much later. Okay, Vichulam, and all of these collections, they were according to Rabbi Akiva, according to the teachings of Rabbi Akiva, because he was the teacher of all of these these individual hachamim who did this project of collecting and organizing all these, connecting all these laws to the written text. And anybody who didn't participate in this project, they didn't have like a book that later, when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi needs to start organizing it, the other teachings aren't written anywhere and can't be quoted. So that's why we say that the entire Torah Shebe'al Peh that we have today is basically the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. That is why Rabbi Akiva is maybe one of the most famous of the Chachamim, because he is responsible for Judaism as it looks today. Rabbi Ishmael was also a student of Rabbi Akiva. Piresh me'ele shemot ad sof Torah, right? So he took everything from, except for the first book of Genesis, which doesn't have many mitzvot, and any mitzvah in Genesis is usually mentioned later on throughout the other four books of the Torah. So he started from the book of Exodus, Shemot. So from Me'ele Shemot, that's Sof Torah, the entire Torah. And he called his composition the Mechilta. V'chen Rabbi Akiva chiber Mechilta. And Rabbi Akiva himself also wrote a Mechilta. V'chachamim acherim acharehem chiberu midrashot. And other chachamim afterwards also wrote books of Midrash. Here we're talking more specifically Midrash Halacha. All these books previously that we mentioned are all Midrash Halacha. As well, Chachamim later on also wrote other Midrashot, not just Halachic Midrashim, but also Midrashe Agada, right? Stories which you have Midrash Rabbah and Midrash Tanhuma, which is mostly non-Halachic Midrashim. Similar to the Midrash that we studied previously. והגדול בחוכמה מכל תלמידי רבי עקיבא היה רבי מאיר, right? But the greatest of his students was Rabbi Meir. And what makes him so great? והנה Rebbe, right? Rebbe, we said, is, who remembers who Rebbe is? Also known as Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and also known as Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, right? Rabbi Judah the Prince, the composer of the Mishnah itself. So Hine Rebbe ahaz bahalacha b'derech Rabbi Meir. When he came to write,
is he the Meir Balanes?
Sorry,
Is he the Rabbi Meir Balanes, the one of the students of
right? Yes,
Rabbi Akiva?
right.
This one.
This is the famous Rabbi Meir.
Oh.
So Rabbi Meir was one of the greatest of the Tanaim, and he was a student of Rabbi Akiva. He was the greatest of the students of Rabbi Akiva, even though he was the youngest. And he was ordained twice, if you remember from our previous classes. Once when he was still young, like a teenager, and later on again. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, when he came to put the Mishnah together, he preferred the works of Rabbi Meir. Which was, in effect, the teachings of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva was his teacher. כי דרך רבי מאיר קצר וקרוב ללמד. So the primary reason why he preferred the writings of Rabbi Meir over the others is because Rabbi Meir, he was able to formulate his halachot in a way that it's brief, it's short, and it's very easy to teach. It's good teaching material. It's not too complicated. He doesn't over explain, and he doesn't subtract anything. And if you want to put something together that people can study off by heart, he said, well, Rabbi Meir's his project, his book is much it's much easier than all the others. So as a base, he said, I'm going to take Rabbi Meir's work and I'm going to work off of that. I'll edit that. ודבריו מחוברים חיבור יפה, right? And it's written nicely. It's written easily. כל דבר עם הדומה לו, right? He puts things. He also organized it very well. Meaning, he goes from Ilchot Shabbat to Ilchot Yom Tov, and he doesn't have Ilchot Shabbat, and then the next chapter is talking about Nida, something completely unrelated. So it's also well structured. ודבריו מדוקדקים מכל חכמי התנאים. And he was very, very accurate in his wording. Meaning you can learn from the accuracy, if he said something in the plural form as opposed to the singular, maybe he's hinting to something over there, as opposed to maybe the other Hachamim who weren't as meticulous as Rabbi Meir. Ve'en bahem sifat yeter. He says, and there's no redundancy in the writings of Rabbi Meir. So it's accurate, it's precise, it doesn't repeat itself, it's succinct and short, and it's well structured. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he says, well, why not just use this and just edit it? And that's why we have a rule in the Mishnah. The rule is when you're studying Mishnah, if the Mishnah doesn't specify who it's quoting from, by default, it's Rabbi Meir. Always. It's the rule, the general rule is Stam Mishnah, right? A Mishnah, Stam means it's put there plainly without specifying who said it. Says Stam Mishnah, just assume it was Rabbi Meir. וכל עניין עולה בטעמו מבלי הרבות דברים אשר אין להם צורך. Right? And so everything he writes, he doesn't expand too much, more than what's necessary. So it's perfect to teach it off by heart. ומאומה לא החסיר ולא העדיף. And he didn't subtract anything from our traditions, and he didn't add anything. רק הכל בא במקום צר ודרך קצרה. Right? But everything is brought in the most succinct and shortest way possible. ואף על פי שכל החכמים שווים בטעמיהם. Right? And this is even though all the Chachamim, they all have the same, call it halachic rationale behind it, especially since they all came out of the school of Rabbi Akiva, right? But Rabbi Meir had the best summary of his teachings. אכן, אחרי שהיה רבי עקיבא רחב לב, ותלמידו רבי מאיר גם כן רחב לב, על כן היה סידורה משובח מכל התנאים האחרונים. Right, since Rabbi Akiva was one of the greatest of the Tanaim, right, he had the broadest understanding, the deepest understanding, and his student Rabbi Meir as well. Therefore, his compilation was absolutely better than all the others. ולסיבה זאת, לקט רבי והוסיף בה גם מה ששנו ביומו. And that's why he based himself off of the writings of Rabbi Meir, and he added on to that anything new that was developed after Rabbi Meir until his times. V'sidera lefi binato, right? And he organized it according to his wisdom, according to his rationale. ופירש בה גם כן כל טרפי ועיקרי מחלוקת החכמים. And he also added the reasoning behind the mahalokot of the different חכמים. מפני כי הוא היה מאותן החכמים ששמעו מרבותם החולקים. He says, and the reason why he was able to also maybe the reason why he had an interest to not just present the opposing opinion, but also present the reasoning behind their opinion, was because he learned from both different opinions. He learned both different approaches. He understood the rationale behind it. So he was able to bring that forward in the Mishnah. So Rabbi Meir, he has this perfect, beautiful composition, presenting all the halachot, all the teachings from Rabbi Akiva, right? And student that comes after him is Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who's going to put together the Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, wait a minute, this is beautiful, it's perfect. This is what everybody should be studying. However, there are other opinions as well, right? Rabbi Meir is a student of Rabbi Akiva. How about the lineage of my father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all the way back to Hillel? So I'm going to incorporate that too into the Mishnah. And the Mishnah, in this way, represents all of the Chachamim and not just one lineage. It represents everybody. וכן, כל אחד ואחד כותב לעצמו כפי כוחו, right? We said as before, everybody, they, over the years, they accumulate their own summaries. מביאור התורה ומלכותיה, כמו ששמע, right? From the explanations of Torah and Mahalachot, as they learn from them. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
It's going back a little bit, because I just didn't know when to ask.
I'm sorry, I hear you a little bit, how do you call it, like bad reception.
Can you hear me now?
Just speak slowly and loudly.
What midrash did it say we don't have to take literally?
Oh, okay. So those are the midrashe agada. If it's not a derasha on the pasuk coming to teach you an actual law, then it's not necessarily something that needs to be taken literally. The one main rule, general rule that the Chachamim bring is that if it seems impossible, then it probably is, right? If it's some sort of fantastic story of some sort of great miracle, then don't take that literally. There's usually a hidden message in that midrash.
And sorry, what book are we studying right now? What book is this?
This is a compilation of a few different sources that I put together. Right now, we are quoting from Maimonides, the Mishneh Torah. Previously, we were quoting from Rav Sherira Gaon, one of the latest of the Gaonim. Which, although everything we're studying is basically their writings, we're only going to get to learning about who they were at the end of the course, because they were late. They were later. That's why they were able to write about the history. Anything else? Okay. So everybody, they would gather their own writings, put things together, write their own books, right? Everything that was from previous generations and anything new from their generations. והסכימו עליהם בית דין הגדול, וכן היה הדבר תמיד, and this is how it was always until the times of רבנו הקדוש. And then we get to רבנו הקדוש, והוא קיבץ כל השמועות וכל הדינים וכל הביאורים והפירושים ששמעו ממשה רבנו. And he collected all the content that was generated throughout these generations, all the way back from the times of Moshe. I mean, it was developing content, and he was able to take it all and put it together. ושנלמדו בדין של כל דור ודור בכל התורה כולה. Right, that every court and every generation, also every new halacha that they came out with throughout the whole Torah. וחיבר מהכל ספר המשנה. And he put this all together in one book, and this book is called the Mishnah. ושיננו ברבים. And he taught it, recited it in public. Right? This is a book to be learned off by heart. The word Mishnah comes from the word shinun. Shinun means to recite off by heart. ונגלה לכל ישראל, right? And this was published to the public. וכתבוהו כולם, and everybody was able to have their own copy. וריבסו בכל מקום. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he had tremendous wealth. So he was able to publish many copies of this book so that people can learn it and recite it. כדי שלא תשתכח תורה שבעל פה מישראל. And he did this for one purpose, so that the oral law, the oral Torah, does not get forgotten. Because even though he lives in a time of relative peace, a good era for the Jewish people, this was just a small era in a much longer period of chaos for the Jewish people. So he kind of like prepared us for what's coming. Rabbeinu HaKadosh Chiber HaMishnah, right? He authored the Mishnah, and from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, Ve'ad Rabbeinu HaKadosh, from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, lo חיברו חיבור שמלמדים אותו ברבים בתורה שבעל פה. Nobody wrote any book, nobody published anything that was taught in public to the people. Remember, all teachings, all classes on halakha were taught orally. Like you go to a lecture, maybe the rabbi, the master, maybe he has his notes, or everybody has their own personal notes and summaries, but there is no official book to learn from. And this is the first time that even with the Mechilta and the Tosefta and all those books that were gathered previously, they weren't intended to be taught publicly. The Mishnah is the first time we have a book that's published by the court that is the official book of rules to be taught publicly, that everybody can reference. Ela b'chol dor v'dor, rather in every generation, Rosh Bedin u'Navi shaya be'oto hador kotev le'atzmo zichron b'shmuot sheshama mirebotav. Right? Every teacher, every prophet, every president of the court, he has his own notes, right, that he writes for himself. But when he comes to teach, he never teaches a specific formulation, a specific sequence of words. And he teaches it off by heart in his own words. Kol HaSevarot VaShemuot, right? And when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi came and he collected all of these works, Echel b'chibur HaMishnah. So he started putting the Mishnah together, הכוללת ביאור כל המצוות הכתובות בתורה. And the Mishnah includes the explanation of every single mitzvah that is in the Torah. Every one of the 613 mitzvot the Mishnah has the explanation and the details of how to keep that mitzvah, how to perform it. Mehem kabbalot mikubbalot min Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Alav Shalom, right? Among them are the traditions that we received all the way back from the times of Moshe. Umehem lemidiyot shelimedu al pi beit din. And some of them were later laws that throughout the generations that developed, that they used one of those 13 midot in order to decide the law. Ve'en bahin mahloket, right? And those things that didn't have any dispute among the Hachamim. And there are those that there was a dispute between the Hachamim. Those were also recorded. Ukva'am kefi mahloktam piloni omer kach uploni omer kach, right? And he said, okay, there's a mahloket, right? Hillel says so-and-so, and Shammai says something else, right? So he put that in the Mishnah as well. Ve'afilu yachid ha'cholek al rabbim. And even if there was one opinion, a person, an individual who was a minority opinion, and the majority says something else, he still recorded the dispute. Kavad divrei hayachid v'divrei harabim. He recorded both the minority opinion and the majority opinion. Why do you think he did that? Any ideas? I mean, in the case of the majority against the minority, we have a very simple rule. It's, you go according to the majority. So what's the purpose? What's the benefit of recording the minority opinion if halakha isn't going to be according to his opinion anyways? Yes, Michaela.
So if you record both the minority and the majority opinion, in the future, when new Torah scholars go through different opinions, they will know that this a certain opinion was already worked through, and it was decided upon against it. So you don't have to go through things twice.
Perfect. Exactly.
Thank you.
Once you record not only that, but then someone wants to come and bring it up. It says, we already had that opinion, but the majority disputed it. Or if somebody wants to later come and say, oh, but we have a tradition from, let's say, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, that this is the proper teaching. And then we can say, yes, we are aware of that opinion. However, the majority, outvoted them.
Isn't this also wasn't this also something that happened when the Torah scholars disappeared from Israel? They went either to like Egypt or was it Alexandria? I don't remember. Or to Babylon when they went two different ways.
Okay.
Or am I wrong? I might be wrong here.
No, I didn't hear the first part of the sentence.
Oh, so isn't this applicable to when the Torah scholars, the great sages, they had to leave Israel. So there was still a Jewish population in Israel, but not the Torah scholars and the people who were.
That we'll see. Even though there were large communities both in Egypt and Babylon, at this point the main focus is still in the land of Israel.
Okay, I'm sorry.
When the center moves, right, the focus becomes Babylon. That we're going to get to that soon. That's not in this class, the next one.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions? No. Okay. ואחרי שהבינו בני אדם טוענת סידור המשנה ואמיתת הטעמים ההם ודקדוקי הדברים, קיבלו אלו המשניות אשר שנה ונתפשטו אלו ההלכות בכל ארץ ישראל. ואלה הן הלכות דיננה. So he says, after people were exposed to the Mishnah and they understood what benefit there is to the Mishnah and how precise it is, because it was based off of the writings of Rabbi Meir, and it included everybody's opinion, even a minority opinion, and that the rationale behind it is clear, at least to them it was clear. Kibelu elu hamishnayot. They accepted the Mishnah upon them. Right? It's as if they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Right? We will accept it and we will study it. Right? Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Right? Kibelu doesn't just mean they accepted. It's a legal term in Torah shebe'al peh. It's an official acceptance of the Mishnah as a legally binding document. Same way that we accepted the Torah upon ourselves. Same way that Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Umsara liYoshua, v'Yoshua liZkenim, uZkenim linviim, uNviim la'anshe knesset hagedolah. Right? And each generation received the tradition, kibel, right? Kabbalah means tradition. So too, now once the Mishnah was published and everybody saw what great benefit there is to the Mishnah, they accepted the Mishnah as the legally binding composition on the Torah shebe'al peh, on the oral law. So kibelu elu hamishnayot asher shana, right, which he taught, v'nitpashtu, and they spread out bechol Eretz Yisrael, throughout the entire land of Israel. Now all the Jewish people throughout the land of Israel can finally be united under one document, ve'elu hen halachot dinana, and these are our halachot. These are the halachot that we must follow. The halachot of the Mishnah. V'chol shara halachot, and all the other halachot, just want to clarify, when it says halacha is usually understood as law. Halacha does not mean law. Halacha means a formal formulation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a legal formulation, although 90% of the time it's talking about some sort of law. But any precise formulation that is meant to be quoted precisely is called a halacha. So any of the previous books, the Sifra, the Sifri, the Mechilta, the Tosefta, all of that, they're all called the halachot. And the Mishnah, what we call every single Mishnah, we say Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah Bet, Mishnah Gimel, those aren't really meant to be called the Mishnah. It's meant to be called halacha, or halacha Aleph, halacha Bet, halacha Gimel, because they're a precise formulation that you must recite exactly as they were written. Otherwise, it's called agada. Agada means say it in your own words. Halacha means quote it precisely. All right, so v'chol sh'ar ha'halachot, and all the other halachot, the Tosefta, Mechilta, Sifra, Sifri, henichu v'nechshevu b'neihem kemo ha'baraita. Right, those were left aside. Those were like nice complementary things to learn, to expand your knowledge more. However, the one official document was the Mishnah. רק נעיון בהם כמו שמעיין במפרש או בלשון אריכות דברים. Right, same way that you study Torah, the Torah needs to be, the Pesukim need to be quoted precisely. However, you have Rashi on the side, maybe you have a Barbanel, maybe you open up, someone else comes up with a very nice commentary and helps you understand or expands more. So that was the status of anything else that wasn't directly quoted in the Mishnah. אבל עיקר השמח בישראל היה על אלה ההלכות. Right? But we leaned especially on these halachot that were quoted in the Mishnah. וקיבלו כולם באמונה. And they all accepted it on themselves, right? כאשר הבינו ולא נמצא אדם חולק עליהם. Right? As they understood the benefit of the Mishnah, and nobody disputed the Mishnah. The Mishnah was nationally accepted upon everybody. Same way that Torah shebe'al peh originally was accepted by everybody and spread out. Remember, if you guys remember from the earlier classes of how Moshe taught the Torah to everybody, right? First to Aharon, then to his sons, and then to the court, the Supreme Court, and then to everybody who wanted to come, and they went and spread it out to everybody else. Once it was officially accepted, so too this happened with the Mishnah itself. ולמה עשה רבנו הקדוש כך ולא הניח הדבר כמות שהיה? And why did Rabbeinu HaKadosh not just leave things the way they were for the past 3,000 years or 2,000 years? What was wrong with the system that's been going on for 2,000 years that he needed to? It's if you think about it, at that time, now we're accustomed to having a Mishnah and a Talmud and everything, but at his time, it's a radical change in Judaism to have an official document to learn the oral law from, a document to learn oral law. That's a completely radical idea. Because there are fewer and fewer students every generation as a result of the atzarot mithadeshot ba'ot, right? Because more and more persecutions over the generations equals fewer and fewer students, which equals a complete breakdown of Judaism. וממלכת הרשעה פושטת בעולם ומתגברת, right? And the evil, calls it the evil empire is spreading out throughout the world, right? Rome is the evil empire. It's a vicious empire. He happened to be on good terms with the empire, but he knew that wouldn't last forever. וישראל מתגלגלים והולכים לקצוות, and the Jewish people are spreading out throughout the world, as Michaela said, to Egypt on one hand, to Babylon on the other, right? To us, that seems still pretty close. However, he foresaw them going as far, Persia and China and throughout all of Europe and North Africa, and eventually you have one of the biggest Jewish communities today on the other side of the ocean in New York, right? So he wanted to equip the Jewish people for this long, terrible galut. So he put together one composition, one book, right, that could be in the hands of everybody, and something that is as short as could possibly be, that still encompasses everything, so that it could be learned relatively quickly and it doesn't get forgotten over the generations. And this was his life project, to teach this Mishnah in public, right, throughout his entire life, from publishing the Mishnah until the day he died. Him and his court, they focused on making sure everybody knows the Mishnah. וחיבר המשנה שנת ג' אלפים תתקמת, right, and he composed the Mishnah the year 3949. This is 3949 from the creation of the world, or from Adam Harishon. I think you need to subtract 3,600 years to get, so it would be like about the year 300, around the year 300 in the Common Era. שהיא שנת Tafkuf Liminyan Shtarot, which is 500 years after the coming of Alexander the Great to Jerusalem, which is 120 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. All right, so said from the destruction of the Second Temple, right, things just kept getting worse and worse and worse until Rabbi Akiva's time with the Great Revolt, and then it got 10 times worse, and then the Chachamim started putting together anything they can find, any tradition they had, to put it in writing and connect it back to the Torah shebichtav, the written law, and then Rabbi Akiva's student, Rabbi Meir, had the best composition, and his student, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, put everything together in one official document that was later accepted by all the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael at the time, and this took place 120 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, and now there is one document that everybody can relate to and take with them, no matter where they are exiled to throughout the world. That is the end of this section. Ends with the publication of the Mishnah, year 3949. And if anyone has any questions, please. Not, I will jump to the end, the last few minutes that we have.
Sammy, because you said that it was a radical idea to be learning oral Torah with a document, was
Right.
lots of
just saying that just shows you how radical it is.
Yeah, was there dispute among them that it shouldn't be written down, or were they in agreement that it should be written down?
Yes, there was dispute. There wasn't dispute on the Mishnah, but basically what happened is, like I said previously, Rabbi Akiva was pushing to write everything up, whatever they can. So him and his students, his followers, his students, that's what they were doing. The other Chachamim weren't doing that. So when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi came to put the Mishnah together, and that's why the Chachamim say the Kullehu Aliva de Rabbi Akiva, all the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Akiva, because some of the disputes were recorded, but they didn't have written publications like Rabbi Akiva and his students did. So what happened was, those who were adamant about not writing the Torah Shebe'al Peh, they're not as represented in the Mishnah as the others. So it's kind of like
That's a bit sad because we didn't get to hear about them as well, because they wouldn't write down.
Right, so they're not as represented, but the Yehuda HaNasi, being a student of that lineage as well, was able to record their opinions, or some of their opinions. However, it's not, the basis of the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir.
Right.
And Rabbi Meir is the student of Rabbi Akiva. So it's kind of like survival of the fittest. They didn't adapt, so they didn't how do you call it, live on as the teachings of Rabbi Akiva and his students did.
Right. Thank you.
Anything else? A great question, by the way.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you much better now.
Okay. Sorry, I want to go back to what Maimonides is saying about midrash, if possible. I didn't fully hear, but did he list? It sounded like he listed some of the midrash that he doesn't consider to take literal? Did he list Seder Alom Rabbah?
Oh, no, there's tremendous amount of midrashim. So he didn't list them. None of the chachamim listed the midrashim that are not to be taken literally. So as a general rule, the midrashim, if they seem like they don't make sense, they're not logical, they're not what you would perceive in your day-to-day life, then try to find a deeper meaning. Michaela asked about Midrash a while ago, and she actually did her homework and started to ponder about it and started emailing me. Maybe it means this, maybe it means this. And that's what the Rambam and the Hachamim are telling you to do. They say, you see a Midrash that seems weird, it's because it is weird. All right? Try to figure it out.
What do you think? Well, I guess I already asked this question, but this is maybe a bit more specific. What do you think of people who take Rashi quoting Midrash as literal?
Well, if you this composition here that I put together is mostly based on introductions. Introduction of the Rambam to the Mishnah, the introduction of the Rambam to his legal book, the Mishnah Torah, and introductions are so important that some people even publish books just gathering introductions. All the introductions to the Mishnah, or all of Maimonides' introductions to whatever he was coming to explain, but just one volume on all his introductions. So if you really want to understand Rashi's intentions, you should pay attention to what he writes in his introduction. And he writes clearly that he's basing his interpretation, his commentary to the Torah, on Midrashim. And Midrashim, by default, aren't meant to be taken literally.
I've been taught different things about taking Rashi literally.
Well, welcome to the Jewish nation.
Yeah, but I don't. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, I'll read Rashi's introduction.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll do a very brief, how do you call it? Kind of like crash course over the different generations. So first, 14th of Nisan, 2448, the Jewish people, great exodus, leave Egypt. Vav Sivan, right? About 50 days later, right? Receive the Torah, accept the oral Torah upon themselves at the foot of Mount Sinai. That's when we enact the covenant between us and God. Now, throughout the next 40 generations, 40 years, Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching the oral law to the entire people until the day that he passes away on the 7th of Adar, year 2489. And that is when he, at least officially, publishes the written law. All right, so we have an exact date for the publication of the Torah Shebichtav. That was the 7th of Adar, year 2489. From then on, right, the Torah is passed down one generation to another through the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court are the ones who officially receive the Torah from the previous generation, teach it to the next generation, and officially transmit it to the next generation of the Supreme Court. So I put two columns here, right? Melech, which is the king, which isn't always the king, but it's the political leader. And on the other column is the president of the court. So you can go through from Shaul to David to Shlomo to Yoshaphat. These are the political leaders. And opposite them we have the presidents of the court, all the way down to the destruction. Well, actually, a little bit prior to the destruction of the first temple, where the second to last king, Yehoniah, is exiled from Judah, and he goes to Babylon, and over there he establishes the yeshiva, the first yeshiva in Babylon, which doesn't have as much importance yet in comparison to the Supreme Court that's still functioning in Eretz Yisrael. All right, and he calls this Beit Knesset Deshaf Biyati, right? That was relocated from the temple, and he brought stones and dirt from the temple in order to inaugurate this new yeshiva. All right, so now the how do you call it? Sovereignty over the land of Israel is transferred, is taken by the Babylonians, right? So we have Nebuchadnezzar. He destroys the first temple, and then after Nebuchadnezzar, right, who controls the land of Israel? It's conquered by the Persians. Koresh, Cyrus the Great, he conquers Babylon, right, and he puts out a decree that everybody could come back to Eretz Yisrael, right, and rebuild the Jerusalem, including the temple. However, they started rebuilding Jerusalem, but there was a build freeze in Jerusalem during the times of Koresh. Actually, after Koresh, Daryavish, after Koresh was Ahasuerus, right? Ahasuerus from the story of Esther, times of Haman, who was, anti-Semitic, and he paused everything that was going on in construction of Jerusalem until the son of Ahasuerus and Esther, right, was Darius. And Darius, he gave us permission to continue the construction of the second temple, right? And then later on, during this time, we didn't have sovereignty, but we lived well in Israel. And then the Greeks came and conquered the Persian Empire, right? We still didn't have sovereignty, but Alexander the Great, he was called great for a reason. We learned about Shimon HaTzadik, right, the righteous, his meeting with Alexander the Great. Bottom line is they reached an agreement that Alexander the Great wasn't going to attempt to conquer Jerusalem and destroy the temple, and we could continue living peacefully with some degree of autonomy. This continued until Antiochus, about 130 years later. Antiochus, we get to the story of Hanukkah and the Hashmonean revolt. Antiochus was against, he wanted to destroy Judaism. He wanted everyone to become Greek. The Hashmonean, which was a family of priests, they started a revolt against him, and it went pretty well. And for the first time since the destruction of the first temple, we restored Jewish sovereignty to the land of Israel. And we had a few generations of kings. Some of these kings weren't that great, right? We see Horkanus, he killed many of the Chachamim. Alexander Yanai, he also killed many of the Chachamim. He didn't get along with the Chachamim. He didn't like the Supreme Court. All right, then we get to King Harold, who was towards the end of the Second Temple. He completely renovated the Second Temple. The picture of the Second Temple that we know of today was King Harold's renovation of the temple. He completely expanded the Temple Mount, right, to its size today, which is almost 4 times the original size. He turned it into a huge platform of like 500 meters on 500 meters. All right. And then after that, we have the Romans. The Romans come and they conquer Jerusalem. Aspasianus, right? He is, Neron, the emperor Neron dies, and Aspasianus, who was the general in Judea, is appointed as the new Caesar instead of him, and his son Titus becomes the new general in his place over the land of Israel, and he is the one who puts down the Jewish revolt against the Romans and destroys the Second Temple. All right, this is the times of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Remember, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he started the lineage of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. In parallel, there was also Rabban Gamliel HaZaken, right? Was the student of Hillel, right? Then Rabban Gamliel HaZaken, then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, all the way down to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi as well. And during this time of Rabbi Akiva is the great Bar Kokhba Revolt against the Romans, which fails. I mean, it went well for a while. In fact, there were a few kings in succession of Bar Kokhba, but it ended with the complete destruction of Beitar, a huge massacre, and Roman vengeance against the Chachamim, which really destroyed the Jewish people. And that's when Rabbi Akiva and his students, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Ishmael, they all started putting together all these traditions until the times of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was actually on very good terms with the Roman emperor, and that's when they had relative peace during his time, and he was able to put together the Mishnah based primarily on the works of Rabbi Meir, the student of Rabbi Akiva. And once he published the Mishnah, it was accepted in the year 3949. It was accepted by all the Chachamim of his generations. Ashira mentioned before that maybe there was disputes. Yes, there were big disputes prior to the Mishnah on whether the Torah shebe'al peh, the oral law, should be put into writing. What put an end to that dispute was when they saw how great a composition the Mishnah was, and they understood its benefit, not just for now, but going forward. And the rest of his life, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and his court focused on teaching the Mishnah and teaching it publicly and publishing it. He was very rich. He was able to write many copies of the Mishnah for the Chachamim to take with them wherever they may end up finding themselves in the world. All right, and this is the end of the Tanaim. The end of the era of the Tanaim is basically with the publication of the Mishnah. After the publication of the Mishnah is a new era, is the post-Mishnah era of Judaism.